Thank you for your generous giving, your generous heart as we took up the offering there during the bumper. And we are a generous church in many ways, not just financially. If you haven't seen the whole pile of stuff out in the lobby with Miriam's Hope, where last week we talked about different ways to donate and give to them, and many of you have responded in great ways. After service, if you'd like to pick up some more stuff or pick up more cards to know what else you could provide, you can certainly do that. And we certainly are a generous church, and there are many, many opportunities in our world for us to give and to proclaim His name and worship as we do that. So thank you for your generosity. We're in our second to last week of our Storyteller series. We've gone through 10 weeks now. This is our 11th week, if I remember right, or maybe 12th week for 13 total, of Jesus' parables, these stories He told to teach us about His kingdom, to teach us about how He saw the world and how He wants us to see and to live in this world in a very unique way. And today, we're going to try to cover a lot of ground. I'll just warn you, we're going to be in Matthew 24 and 25. We're going to cover 5 parables today. But the reason why is because these all come together for one unified message for us. And so we're going to begin in chapter 24, verse 26, and then we'll go almost all the way through the rest of chapter 25. Now, as a culture, we tend to have a fascination with the end times. It's a hot topic in a lot of churches across America. And what's interesting to me, I think, is every generation has looked around at the world and thought to themselves, this is getting so bad, Jesus has to return soon. Like, people have literally, every generation has thought this since Jesus. For 2,000 years, people have looked around and we've seen the brokenness of the world. We've seen the sin. We've seen just the heartache, the hurt, the pain. And we know instinctively this is not how God intended it to be. And so we look around and we have this hope. We have this hope of restoration, of how He will come back and His return will bring things back to how they should be. And so every generation has looked around and had this hope of His return sooner than later. We live in this world that can be hard to live in some days, right? I mean, if you watch the news very much, it's easy to be scared, to have frustration. It's easy to feel the pain of others, to start to get impatient, to think, God, what are you up to? Why have you not brought this to a close here? Why haven't you wrapped this up any sooner? My hope is that we, as we live in this time, that we would live with hope, that we would understand He will return, and we would think about, okay, so how is it that we're living today in light of that? Our passage today, all 5 parables, certainly have an eye towards the end, okay? They certainly have that part of them. When you read it, you're going to see it clear as day. There is this looking towards the end, but I don't believe that is the focus of these passages. I think the focus of the passages is actually today. Today, whenever it is this person's reading it, now or 1,000 years ago, the focus is today, with an eye, with a vision towards the end. I think this passage is focused on this in-between time that can be quite frustrating, that can be quite hard. And so as we walk through these 5 different parables, I want us to see how they clearly link together to show us how today we are to live in light of the end and knowing where it is we live today. Okay, so that's kind of where we are heading today, and I want to take these parables one by one because they build on each other. They come in very fast succession. There's almost no gap between them once Jesus gets going, and I want us to just stack them one on top of the other as we walk through the passage. So let's start. We're in Matthew chapter 24, verse 36. But as for that day and hour, no one knows it, not even the angels in heaven, except the Father alone. For just like the days of Noah were, so the coming of the coming of the Son of Man will be. For in those days, before the flood, people were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage until the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing until the flood came and took them away. It will be the same at the coming of the Son of Man. Then there will be 2 men in the field, and one will be taken and one left. There will be 2 women grinding grain with the mill, and one will be taken and one will be left. Jesus is building into his first parable. He's not there yet. He's building into it. And he's emphasized a couple of things already. He's saying no one knows when this will happen. Do you notice how he says no one will know, no one knows the hour, but then he goes on to emphasize it by saying the angels don't even know. No one except the Father knows. That's interesting to me because all throughout history, people have thought they've known. Yet he's pretty clear that no one will know. And then he goes into linking the end of time with Noah and Noah's age. And if you remember back to Genesis chapter 6, that chapter starts out with this very grim assessment of the world. Here's verses 5 and 6 from Genesis 6. He says, "But the Lord saw the wickedness of humankind, that it had become great on the earth. And every inclination of the thoughts of their minds was only evil all the time. The Lord regretted that he had made humankind on earth, and he was highly offended." You hear that. You read that back in Noah's time, and you think, whoa, like that's a pretty stark statement. And Jesus is saying, in the same way it was then, it will be at the end. We shouldn't have any expectation of the world being any less than that right there. Because in the same way that Noah looked around and he saw the pain, he saw the evil, he saw the suffering, he saw the brokenness, we do too. And we shouldn't have this expectation that it's going to be like butterflies and roses and rainbows, because it's not. And in the same way that was the situation, and God prepared a way to act, and he came in and the flood surprised everybody except those who were in the know, right? Noah and his family. That's the way it'll come. The end will come in such a way that it will be surprising. And people will be left. There will be 2 people doing this and 2 people doing that, and all of a sudden, whew, just one. And we won't know. And we see from this peek back towards Noah's time that it'll happen quickly, and it'll be noteworthy event when it happens. And this leads into his first parable, starting in verse 42. He says, "Therefore, stay alert, because you do not know on what day your Lord will come. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known at what time of the night the thief was coming, he would have been alert. He would not have let his house been broken into." Oh, well, that was unexpected. Maybe the thief came in. Were you ready for that? I wasn't, actually. I told him upstairs, I said, sometime, just kill the lights. It was surprising, wasn't it? Were you ready? Because it'll be unexpected. That's the point of this parable. That in the same way the thief comes, he doesn't give you a time and day, right? Because if he did, you'd play Home Alone. You remember the movie? He was ready, right? If we knew, we'd be ready, but we don't know. In the same way you didn't know the lights were going to be turned off. You had no time to prepare. You didn't have time to say, wait a second, let me get my flashlight out. Boom, it just happened, right? Same thing. Our first parable is very clear. Jesus is teaching us that his return will be unexpected. So be ready. You won't have time to have it happen and then get ready. We need to be ready. Because in the same way the lights just dropped on us, in the same way, he'll be back. And so the question is, are we ready? I think we should stop trying to figure out when and just figure out how to be ready. What's it look like to be ready? Since that's what he's made clear, that we're to be ready. What is that? Where do we give our time and attention to that so that we're ready? That's coming here in a little bit, okay? Let's keep walking. Let's go to our second parable. This starts in verse 45. "Who then is the faithful and wise slave whom the master has put in charge of his household to give the other slaves their food at the proper time. Blessed is the slave whom the master finds at work when he comes. I tell you the truth, the master will put him in charge of all of his possessions. But, that's a contrast, so we have two things being contrasts. Here's the second one. But if that evil slave should say to himself, my master is staying away a long time, and he begins to beat his fellow slaves and to eat and to drink with drunkards, then the master of that slave will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour when he does not foresee, and will cut him in two pieces and assign him a place of the hypocrites where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. This parable is contrasting two slaves, a faithful and an unfaithful slave. The faithful one is one who's described as being wise, one who is working diligently, one who is stewarding his responsibilities over the other slaves well. And the other slave, the second one, is described as evil. That should really alarm us, that description. That's quite the statement. This slave is abusing his position. He's abusing the freedoms that have been given to him by the owner. He's shirking his responsibilities. He's not acting faithfully. This parable, the master comes home sooner than expected. See, neither slave knew. One was being faithful and one wasn't. And then the master shows up one day. And I'm sure the evil slave was not expecting it, and he knew he'd been caught. Uh-oh. I thought I had time to mess around. I thought I had time to do what I wanted to do it my way. And then, poof, one day, it was over. So when will he return? We don't know. The question is, are we stewarding our responsibilities well? If he returned this afternoon, would he find you being faithful or not? If he returned this afternoon or on Wednesday or next month sometime, would you be described as a good and wise servant of Jesus or as an evil one? See, for those of us who are disciples of Jesus, this is meant for us to ask ourselves this question about what kind of servant am I? How am I stewarding the responsibilities that have been given to me? How am I stewarding this life that God has blessed me with in all its different ways, whether we're talking financial, or we're talking about our skills, our abilities, our relationships, all these things. Are we stewarding them well? Are we wise in this way, or are we not? And it's not just for us, it's for those who are not following Jesus as well. Because the end of this parable is real. You notice it says, he will send him where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. This is hell. We can't sugarcoat what this is. It's a reality of life. And so for those of us who are not following Jesus, we need to ask ourselves, why not? What has stopped us thus far? There's a rabbi, an old rabbi named Eliezer, and his saying, it was kind of meant to be a joke, but one of the sayings he had is, repent one day before you die. Which of course begs the question, which day will that be? But that's all you have to do, right? Just one day before you die. But why not today? Why wait till then? And the answer is because we don't want to, right? We'd rather live our life our way, not by professing our faith in him and then placing ourselves in submission to who he is as God. We'd rather ignore him, pretend he's not there, live our lives our own way, and just hope that we got warning. That when the day comes, we'll have enough time to repent one day before, right? That doesn't seem wise at all. You might think you got plenty of time for your rebellion, for your flings, for your wild adventures, for your self-centered living, but the question is, really, do you? If we have no warning of nor death nor his return, do you really have time for that? See, this is a challenge. Why are you postponing your faith in Jesus? Why are you postponing this decision? God loves you. He's been seeking you out since the day he put you on this planet. You've been simply pushing him away or ignoring him. Why continue? He loves you. He's wooing you to him. Why would you run, knowing that if you time it wrong, the consequences are hell? The fact of the matter is, we all need to be ready. Whether you're following Jesus or not, are you ready for his return? Because the point of the second parable is that we not only don't know when he'll return, but he very likely could return sooner than we expect. So are we ready? Let's go to our third parable. Chapter 25, verse 1. At that time, the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. Now, I need to stop and we need to talk about some cultural things about what's happening here, because this story doesn't make a lot of sense if we don't understand the kind of traditions of their time. The family and friends of a wedding party, a couple, would gather at the groom's house, and they would have a huge party. And it wouldn't start until the evening time. And so they would all gather inside and outside and around the home. And the groom and his buddies, kind of his posse, the guys he would run with, they would parade across town to the bride's house. And they would yell and make music and have noise makers. And it was a time of celebration, announcing to the community, this dude's going to get his wife. And they would celebrate and parade up and down the streets all across town to her house on the other side of town. And when they would get her, she would come with all of her friends. And then they would parade the same way back across town, hooping and hollering and drawing attention for all the community to come and celebrate with them that a marriage is about to happen. And then when they would get back to the groom's house, that's where the wedding and reception would happen late into the night. Okay, so this is what's happening. The groom has left. He's going throughout town with all his buddies. They're hooping and hollering, celebrating, making this announcement to the community of what's to happen. And so these ladies, these 10 ladies, have their lamps because it's nighttime. They're outside of the home. They didn't get inside the home. They're outside the home, and they have them lit for their safety, and so they can see after dark. And they're waiting for the groom and his groomsmen and the bride and the brides, all of them to come back for the wedding. Okay, let's go to verse 2 now that we know this setting. 5 of the virgins were foolish, and 5 were wise. When the foolish ones took their lamps, they did not take extra olive oil with them. But the wise ones took flasks of olive oil with their lamps. When the bridegroom was delayed a long time, they all became drowsy and fell asleep. Okay, so they left home. Some of them brought their lamps full of oil. Some brought their lamps full of oil and extra oil. And they're waiting at the house, and the groom and his buddies and the bride, they're having a grand old time parading around town. And instead of this being a short ordeal, it turns out to be a much longer ordeal. And it gets into the night, and these ladies fall asleep on the street outside the home. The picture being drawn here is this parallel, if you've read all of Scripture from beginning to end, this parallel between this wedding party, this scene happening, and the wedding at the end of Revelation of Jesus and the church being wed together. The foolish women are waiting for the party to start. The wise women are waiting for the party to start. And we already have a hint of what's going to happen. Because see, this time, the surprise of the parable is that they're delayed. The wedding is delayed. And the question is, will the women be ready? So let's read verse 6. But at midnight, there was a shout. Look, the bridegroom is here. Come out to meet him. Then all the virgins woke up and they trimmed their lamps. That means they got them prepared. They kind of relit them and re-stoked them. The foolish ones said to the wise, give us some of your oil because we're out. No, they replied, there won't be enough for you and for us. Go instead to those who sell oil and buy some for yourselves. But while they had gone to buy it, the bridegroom arrived. And those who were ready went inside with him to the wedding banquet. And then the door was shut. Later, the other virgins came too, saying, Lord, Lord, let us in. But he replied, I tell you the truth, I do not know you. Therefore, stay alert, because you do not know the day or the hour. So we have these 10 virgins, 5 wise and 5 foolish. The wise ones came prepared. They came prepared in case the bridegroom was delayed. The others did not. See, the surprise of the parable is the delay. See, Jesus, he will return and it'll be unexpected. And what if it's later than you expected? What if it's later than you thought it was going to be? Will you be prepared? See, there's a clear difference being drawn between those who were prepared, who were faithful and ready, and those who were not. As impatient as we may be, as hopeful as we may be, the fact of the matter is every generation who has hoped Jesus would return in their lifetime, he hasn't. He is delayed longer than many thought. It's perfect in his timing. He's late in their timing, right? And some of us may be thinking the same thing. We're looking around the world going, God, what are you doing? Surely you should have come back last week at least, right? But what if he's longer? And what if in the meantime we get distracted? What if we walk away from our faith? What if we become disinterested in our faith? What if we backslide? What if there are other things that come along and woo our hearts to them instead of him? And this time of waiting, that can seem just arduous for us, that can seem really difficult, it can test our patience, test our faith. What if we allow ourselves to lose focus, to lose that urgency, that expectation, that hopefulness that maybe it'll be today? Maybe it'll be today. See, our third parable is confronting us with the reality that he will return and it'll be unexpected. And it might be earlier than you expect, but it might be later than you expect. And so either way, are you ready? Are you prepared? Have you allowed this wait to lull you to sleep? Allowed your faith to dim a little? Your expectation to dwindle? Because after all, he didn't come yesterday, right? Are we ready, whether he comes sooner or later than we expect? See, these 3 parables are drawing a question out for us of, are we ready? Because he will come unexpected, because he could come when we don't expect it, earlier than we expect, are we ready? He might come later. Are you still ready? Do you have that perseverance to still be ready? The question gets pressed upon us that because we don't know the timing, we really have to be diligent in being prepared. And a wise person will be prepared. All right, let's go to our 4th parable, starting in verse 14. For it's like a man going on a journey who summoned his slaves and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, each according to his ability. And then he went on his journey. Okay, so talent is a measurement we don't use, so it's hard to have a grasp of what he is entrusting to these guys. But a talent is a weight measurement. It's roughly 75 pounds. So think about a talent being 75 pounds worth of money. Okay? Now, generally speaking, a talent was about 20 years worth of income for somebody. And so, if we do the math here, that means the person who was entrusted with 5 talents was entrusted with 100 years of income. And the person with 2 talents, 40 years, and 1 talent, 20 years worth of income. So take your annual income and multiply it out however you'd like with whichever number, and that's how much money they were entrusted with. It's a lot of money. That is a wealthy person and a person with a lot of trust to entrust anybody with that much money. Okay? But so we have 3 people, 3 slaves. They've been entrusted with different amounts of money given to them by their owner, and their owner goes on his journey. Let's keep reading. Verse 16. The one who had received 5 talents went off right away and put his money to work and gained 5 more. So he doubled it. In the same way, the one who had 2 gained 2 more. So he doubled it as well. But the one who had received 1 talent went out and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. So we're not told how they invested it, but somehow each of them invested this money that had been entrusted to them. It wasn't their money, right? It was the owner's money. They had been entrusted to steward it. Each of them found a different way to invest the money. 3 different ways. 2 of them doubled the money and got a return on it. The other one did something that, if you remember back a few weeks with one of the parables we talked about, was a pretty logical thing to do, and that's bury it. You remember that parable a few weeks ago? We talked about that when times were uncertain and times were scary and people didn't know what to do with their money in terms of how to secure it because there was turmoil and things, one thing they would do is bury it because at least it's hidden in the midst of all the turmoil. But let's be honest, to bury your money is a reaction of fear, right? And in times of great turmoil, in their situation where there was no banking system or anything like that, maybe that's a logical fear or a logical response. But what we see here is that this man, there was no situation of fear. It was just simply, you've been entrusted with something to steward it. And his response was one of fear, and we're going to see that here in a moment. He says, I feared you, Mr. Owner. That was my fear. The fear wasn't the situation. It was the fear of the owner of the money. And so out of fear, he buries it. And it says that he gets no return. He just gets the money back out of the hole later. Okay? So let's see what happens here when the owner comes home, how the owner responds to this. So verse 19. After a long time, that's interesting, because remember, it's unexpected, right? So we get a very vague amount of time when the owner comes home. After a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled his accounts with them. And the one who had received 5 talents came and brought him 5 more, so 10 talents total, saying, Sir, you entrusted me with 5 talents. See, I have gained you 5 more. The master answered, Well done, good and faithful slave. You have been faithful in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. That's a really pleasant response, isn't it? We like that one. Good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your master. The one who had 2 talents also came and said, Sir, you entrusted 2 talents to me. See, I have gained you 2 more, so 4 total. His master answered, Well done, good and faithful slave. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. That's a very pleasant one as well, isn't it? We like that one. Verse 24. Then the one who had received 1 talent came and said, Sir, I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you did not sow and gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid. Then I went and hid your talent in the ground. See, you have what is yours. But the master answered, Evil and lazy slave. So you knew that I harvested where I didn't sow and gathered where I didn't scatter. Then you should have deposited my money with the bankers. And on my return, I would have received my money back with interest. Therefore, take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10. For the one who has will be given more, and he will have more than enough. But the one who does not have, even what he has will be taken from him. And throw that worthless slave into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. We're getting 3 descriptions here of these 3 slaves: good and faithful servant, and evil. Two who stewarded things well and got a return upon the investment of the man, and one who did not, who just simply buried it, just simply out of fear, kind of hoarded it for themselves, in fear that if they did anything with it, they might lose it. It's noteworthy also here that this passage ends with weeping and gnashing of teeth again. It's the second time we've seen this. We can't ignore that reality. Jesus is making it clear that it's present. So if the end were to come, what would you be called? Would you be called a good and faithful servant, or would you be called an evil one? How are you stewarding what's been entrusted to you? And this isn't just about money. It is about our money, but it's about far more than that. It's about our lives. It's about who we are. God has granted us 1,000,000 blessings. And those blessings were meant for you to bless others. That's the story of Abraham, blessed to be a blessing. The question is, everything you have, your time, your money, your talents, your relationships, your possessions, your circumstances, your opportunities, all of these things, how are we stewarding them? Are we simply stewarding them for ourselves, looking at ourselves, looking at the world in fear, saying, what if I'm scared. And so we just hoard it all in, scared to do anything with it? Or are we investing it well? Where are we giving our lives? Where do we exert our energy at? Where do we put our mental bandwidth towards? If he were to return today and assess what you've done with your talents, what would his verdict be? It's a hard one. This is a convicting one for us because we all like how we've designed our own lives. But we don't get to be the one who makes that decision, do we? It's him. So let's add this up here. We have no idea when he'll return. He may return sooner than we expect. He may return later than we expect. So you and I, how are we stewarding what we've been given? Are we ready for his return? See, I think Jesus has given us a privilege, a blessed privilege of inviting us into his work, into what it is he is doing, of pursuing the whole world, wanting to bring the world back into relationship with him. He's given us this invitation, and we can view it as a burden. We can view it as a bad thing if we'd like. And in doing so, we can kind of like section off my stuff from his, or at least what we perceive as that. We can section off our lives in different ways that we say, I want to protect what's mine. Or we can steward it well. And we can invest in the kingdom, in eternity, and to what he is up to. We can join him in what he is doing, if we'd like. And that's what he's invited us into. And his definition of stewardship is, have we stewarded what he's entrusted to us well towards his end? In this parable, the master's end was to make more money, wasn't it? What's God's end? What is the kingdom purpose that he wants us to invest all of our lives into? While we wait, we should be doing that. While we wait for his return, we should be stewarding our lives well. Let's go to our last parable, starting in verse 31. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be assembled before him, and he will separate people one from another, like a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, the sheep, come, you who are blessed by my Father, blessed by my Father. Inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food, and I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or naked and clothe you? It's interesting, they don't even recognize when it was that they did what they did. When did we see you sick and in prison and visit you? And the king will answer them, I tell you the truth, just as you did it for one of the least of these brothers or sisters of mine, you did it for me. And then he'll say to those on his left, depart from me. These are the ones on the goats. You are accursed into the eternal fire that has been prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not receive me as a guest. Naked, and you did not clothe me. Sick, and in prison, and you did not visit me. And then they too will answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and didn't give you what you needed? They didn't recognize that they had looked past him either. And he'll answer them, I tell you the truth, just as you did not do it for one of the least of these, you did not do it for me. And these will depart into eternal punishment, and the righteous into eternal life. The sheep in this parable are those whose faith compels them to love one another well. Their faith has transformed their hearts in such a ways that even without knowing it often, they loved other people really well. And we can't ignore the fact that the people on this list are the people who are easily ignorable, are the people who we generally look past very quickly, those who are in need, those who in these situations can be really hard to love. But their faith compelled them to love them. Their hearts were such that they loved them naturally and didn't even think about it. And the goats, on the same hand, were those who didn't. Their faith was such, it impacted their lives in such that they didn't even notice the people in need. They were just there, and they continued on their way, doing their own thing, focused on themselves. When we understand God's heart, He changes our heart. He changes us. And when we understand what it is He's asked us to do in our lives, we understand better what it is to steward this time well, to steward our talents. That this time isn't just about living our lives however we want, get right with Jesus so whenever He comes back, you're golden. That isn't it. It's that we would live, we would steward everything He has blessed us with in such a way that our hearts just pour out for one another. That we're kind and we're gracious and we're generous. And you may not even realize it. Or you might be one who is ignoring those situations, that you see it, but you don't want to. And you think that somehow, like if Jesus showed up and if somebody said, hey, this is Jesus, you'd be like, whew, and you'd be right there, ready to serve Him however He wants, right? Jesus, what do you need? Are you thirsty? I'll get you more water. Are you hungry? I'll go get something to eat. Yet we don't have the same posture with people. We don't at all. We don't look out and see people and love them like we would Jesus Himself. So these 5 parables have come together to give us a vision of how it is we should be living right now in the in-between time. All of us want Jesus to come soon, right? We see the pain. And all of us know the ultimate solution will be his return. That's, yes. But here's the fact of the matter. So we must wait. Because none of us know when he'll return. And so the most faithful thing we can do is to wait faithfully. Is to wait ready for his return. To wait doing what it is he has asked us to do. And as scary as the world is, as upsetting, concerning as it is, our fears, our desire for him to come back won't change what it is. What will is our action, us living as he has asked us to, as us being his hands and feet, embodying his kingdom in this world, so that in this time and in this place, our world looks that much more like the kingdom than it did yesterday. That's how we live faithfully. That's how we wait well. See, we can spend our time figuring out when, guessing, making our charts, making our timelines, whatever we'd like. And there's value in us knowing what the end looks like. Like, I'm not saying there's no value in that. I'm saying we need to know that. But where do we really spend our time devoting our efforts and our energy in? Is it figuring out these things that we're told in the first sentence that nobody knows? Or is it in being faithful? When we live our lives self-centered, we are unfaithful. When we live our lives in fear, we're unfaithful. When we live our lives loving one another really well, we're faithful. We're faithful. These 5 parables have shown us that his return will be unexpected. It might be sooner than you think, so are you ready? It might be delayed longer than you think. Are you going to persist and be ready? You have been entrusted with many things. Are you stewarding them well? Specifically in loving other people. Specifically those who are the least lovable in your life. These parables are coming together in a powerful way to show us what it looks like for us to be faithful until the end, whenever that is. My prayer is that as a church, that's all we want, is to be faithful till the end, whenever that is. Would you pray with me, please? Father, we look around this world and it's troubling. God, there's no denying the pain, the brokenness. And God, we look to you and we know that you are the solution. And so we can quickly run to these hopes that we hang on day in and day out and day in and day out that you'll return. And Father, we pray, would you return? But God, we also understand that doesn't give us permission to not be faithful. And in fact, it's the opposite. You've called us to be your hands and feet in this world. You've called us to be disciples in such a way that it would impact this world we live in. God, what a privilege that is, that call. God, would you well up in our hearts that desire? Would you transform us so that we love incredibly well and may not even know it because it's so natural? God, use us to bring your kingdom to bear in this place a little more. God, I pray this week that each of us would come and sit and spend a little time with you. just simply praying and asking, God, what does this look like for me? How can I be faithful from now until the end? In Jesus' name.